She stood at the edge of the grand hall, uncertain if she was even meant to be there when the first wave of whispers rose like a dark tide and threatened to drown her. A tall woman in a shimmering designer gown turned, surveyed the newcomer's plain black trousers, low-heeled shoes, and unadorned blouse. That woman's lips parted in a contemptuous smile. "Look at her," she announced to a cluster of onlookers, voice dripping with mock sweetness. Did housekeeping forget to clock out? Another, wearing a glittering necklace that caught the chandelier's glare, joined in with a theatrical flutter of eyelashes. "My dear, it must be a misunderstanding. This is a charity gala, not an open audition for background waitstaff." The small group erupted in laughter, each chuckle sharpened by a sense of entitlement that radiated from their curated ensembles. A middle-aged gentleman, impeccably groomed, brushed invisible dust from his lapel as he stepped closer, ignoring the woman's attempt to greet him. "I've seen her sort before," he said, turning so his voice would carry across the hall. "They wander in hoping for free champagne and a bit of leftover caviar." He lifted his hand, flicking away the notion of her presence like one would rid themselves of a mosquito. "Honestly, we should establish a membership filter at the door." People around them glanced over, curiosity flaring, but no one intervened. The few who recognized the newcomer only from a distance had never truly learned her name, nor did they care. She was simply the girl who dressed cheaply, wore no makeup, and drifted through life with a composure they chose to interpret as low ambition. One woman clutched an overpriced clutch to her chest as though the newcomer might snatch it. Another murmured loudly that if the hostess saw a ragged outsider strolling about, the entire event's image would be tarnished. The staff in crisp uniforms approached, uncertain whether to escort her away. They hesitated, reading the tension in the group, absorbing the glances that insisted she doesn't belong here. They said nothing, heads bowed, hoping not to be singled out themselves. A braver socialite wearing elaborate feathers in her hair decided to make it a public spectacle. She edged forward, signaled for a passing waiter to pause, then turned to the young woman in the plain outfit. "I do hope you're in the right place," she said, voice raised so the bystanders could catch every syllable. "Maybe you'd be better off in the kitchen. They might have a spare apron so you can help serve the hors d'oeuvres. It's a step up from whatever you had in mind, I'm sure." Her lips curled and a ripple of amusement fluttered through the listening crowd. Phones began to lift discreetly, capturing the scene, though no mention of open filming was made. The tall woman gave an exaggerated sigh. "It's that illusion some people have," she continued. "They think if they slip into a nice building, they'll magically belong." Then, with a pointed stare at the newcomer's old watch, its face scratched the leather strap worn from years of use, she added, "But time always tells, doesn't it?" The target of these cutting remarks simply stood, adjusting the watch on her wrist with a measured movement. She offered no retort, no frightened expression. Her posture was neither submissive nor confrontational. She just gazed at them with eyes that revealed none of her private thoughts. The hush of expensive perfumes and rustling designer dresses enveloped the hall, swirling around clusters of elegantly postured bodies. A hush that at the moment brimmed with cruel anticipation, as if each person waited for her to flee or crumble. A wiry man in a fitted tuxedo, emboldened by the sense of comedic brutality, took a step forward. "Should we offer her the doggy bag for the scraps?" he asked with mock concern, loud enough for the entire section of the hall to hear. Several bystanders burst into new waves of laughter, raising their champagne flutes in a sarcastic toast to each other's cleverness. A handful of guests on the far side of the room glanced over with mild disapproval, but did nothing. They had come for networking or for the cause the gala purported to support. One of them recognized the newcomer from a distant memory, something about an exclusive boarding school scholarship, but uncertain of the details, that person turned away. The staff, now more confident in the group's momentum, moved in. One of them, wearing the management badge, cleared his throat. "Miss, do you have an invitation?" He kept his voice low, as though offering her a chance to bow out gracefully. A few socialites stifled giggles. "Must we keep up the pretense?" demanded the man with the impeccably groomed hair. "She can't possibly have an invitation. Unless it was forged." The corners of his mouth twitched with delight at his own insinuation. A woman wearing a tight, glittery dress leaned over to another stage, whispering, "Could we please move on? I can't stand the smell of secondhand hopes." Another wave of mean-spirited laughter erupted, and phones rose higher, capturing the woman's face from various angles. Still, she spoke no words to defend herself. She simply angled her head in a small gesture, letting the manager read her expression. It was as though she granted him permission to question her further, though no outward humility shaped her features. Up close, the manager noticed a subtle elegance in her posture, an unassuming confidence that didn't align with the idea of an aimless intruder. Yet the voices behind him were insistent. "Ask her to leave," hissed the tall woman with the gown who seemed the unofficial leader of this humiliating campaign. "We have donors to entertain and images to uphold," she continued, flicking her manicured nails as though flicking away a stray hair. The manager sighed. "Miss, you need to provide proof that you belong here or we'll have to escort you out." He paused, leaving open the remote possibility she had a valid reason for being present. The socialites nearby exchanged glances, each expecting the woman to turn tail and scurry off like a dog from the dinner table. But she did not run nor look crestfallen. Instead, she parted her lips as if to speak, then withheld the words. A moment's silence settled that kind of hush that intensifies tension. The manager opened his mouth to press further, but was interrupted by the voice of a newcomer approaching from behind the smirking group. "Is there a problem here?" This newcomer, dressed in a mid-level brand suit not as flashy as the rest but presentable, surveyed the scene, noticing the ring of onlookers. He recognized the plain woman near the center, gave her a fleeting nod. Then turning to the manager, he added, "I believe she's with me. Let's not make a scene, shall we?" That last statement spurred more laughter from the group. "She's your date?" asked the tall woman, cackling. "I see. That explains everything. You're both quite underdressed for a function of this level." She winked at her cohorts. Perhaps the matching set. The man who had interceded looked uncomfortable. He tried to usher the silent woman away from the prying circle, but they didn't budge. "She needs to show her pass," insisted the manager. "It's policy." The man nodded reluctantly, glancing at the woman who remained impassive. "You do have your official pass, don't you?" he asked, her voice a little too loud, like someone anxious to be done with the confrontation. She slipped a hand into the small purse she carried, plain black, no visible logos, and retrieved what appeared to be a simple invitation card. When she offered it to the manager, the cluster of watchers leaned in, eager to see if it was genuine. The manager studied it, eyes scanning the text, then turned it over to examine the official seal. A faint flush appeared on his cheeks, yet he didn't speak because it was indeed an authentic invitation. The guests around him seemed disappointed, as though robbed of a prime spectacle. The manager tried to salvage his stance. You're on the guest list, but your seat might be in the back row," he said, stumbling over the possible reasons she might not belong among these well-dressed elites. "Yes, usually the donors who sponsor more are placed at the front." A few socialites seized on his words. "That's where she belongs, in the shadows," one sneered. If she insisted on turning up, she should stay far from the main table. Others nodded agreement. The woman said nothing, eyes lingering on a distant vantage point as if the entire conversation bored her. Another man in a too-perfect suit smirked. "It's not that we mind your presence," he stated, "it's just you might not be comfortable among the big players. The conversation might go over your head, dear." A hum of approval droned among them. "Why not find a corner seat?" the tall woman suggested, leaning in as though confiding a secret. "There's usually a leftover breadbasket you can nibble on until the event ends." The man who'd stepped in to help tried to lighten the mood with a half-hearted laugh. "Come on, it's not that big a deal, right?" But the circle of onlookers had grown, with new arrivals joining in. One recognized the silent woman's face from some tabloid snippet months ago, a photograph taken outside a large estate rumored to be worth fortunes. But that person, uncertain of the context, said nothing. Meanwhile, the sparks of cruelty among the crowd flared higher. A woman wearing large diamond earrings observed the newcomer's shoes, plain scuffed, and stage-whispered. Perhaps if she spent a little more time polishing her footwear, she might have enough shine to reflect some class. Another man puffing out his chest chimed in, "It's a pity she's never had to worry about dressing properly. People like that don't know the difference between fashion and frugality." The hypocrisy lay thick in his tone, given how they all seemed to relish proving their superiority. A restless energy rippled through the crowd when the event's coordinator tapped a microphone near the front stage, announcing that guests should take their seats. The humiliators exchanged snide glances, clearly expecting the silent woman to slink off to some remote table at the far end of the hall. The man in the modest suit glanced at her as if to say, "Let's go," but she didn't move. Instead, her gaze swept the opulent room, noticing how the main table was set with lavish centerpieces, exclusive champagne, and name tags for the highest donors. 2 or 3 security guards wandered the perimeter, scanning for any sign of trouble or infiltration. The chatter in the hall grew louder with each passing moment. People pushed toward the front, eager to claim seats near influential leaders, celebrities, or corporate giants. The swirling of expensive perfumes and colognes merged with the tension that hovered like a looming storm. Finally, the woman stepped away from the circle. Her posture remained upright, her expression calm as though an invisible shield surrounded her. She moved toward the rear of the room. Some watchers felt a quiet satisfaction interpreting her departure as a humble retreat. One or two even muttered that she'd learned her place. Yet as she glided past the staff and smaller clusters of guests, she paused near an unoccupied corner scanning for a seat. A deep hush formed around her as if an unseen presence demanded space. The man in the modest suit followed quickly but found he couldn't keep pace with her measured steps. She reached a table that had no occupant, yet likely a last resort seat reserved for stragglers or uninvited plus ones. She settled there without hesitation, her shoulders squared, eyes forward. The staff bustled about finalizing seating. Meanwhile, the ring of tormentors took their places at the front, whispering about how they'd taught the intruder a lesson. A memory from years past drifted across the silent woman's mind, an unspoken recollection of standing in a marble hall, a dignified older man at her side pointing to a grand painting. His instructions about how to navigate social gatherings, how to preserve one's dignity without a single raised voice might have shaped her stoic manner. The older man had said nothing about vanity or demands for recognition. Instead, he pressed upon her a code: never betray who you are by lowering yourself to match someone's cruelty. At that time, she had been a teenager in a private uniform, hair strictly tied back, learning from tutors who insisted on subtlety in all public interactions. Now that discipline manifested in her unwavering calm. The evening's program began. A large video screen at the front displayed the cause for which funds were being raised. Applause echoed for the series of wealthy patrons, each introduced with flowery praise. The tall woman in the shimmering gown was singled out for her philanthropic efforts, drawing cheers. She flashed a smug grin, glancing over her shoulder as if to confirm that the newcomer was indeed banished to the corners. Another philanthropic couple, rumored to have powerful political ties, also took the stage to accept commendations while the crowd roared in approval. The silent figure in the back offered no reaction, content to remain invisible. Yet a flicker of something passed across her face, maybe recognition that many of these philanthropists were simply using the event to flaunt their status and reinforce social hierarchies. Halfway through the speeches, waiters began serving the meal, drifting between tables with silver platters. The front tables received the best attention, the best cuts of steak, the best garnish. The rear table where the young woman sat was left for last, a courtesy portion of bread and a glass of water placed before her. She accepted these with the same quiet composure. One of the waiters, noticing her calm posture, paused and studied her for a beat longer than usual, as though sensing an incongruity. He silently topped up her water glass and moved along. Meanwhile, from across the room, a small group of jaded reporters typed quick notes about the major donors. One of them happened to glance at the woman in the back, recognized a faint detail, something about a rumor from a year earlier that a reclusive heir sometimes visited events under the radar. But uncertain, he just jotted a question mark. Flash after flash from cameras illuminated the stage, capturing the lavish centerpieces and the triumphant smiles of those recognized. The speeches stretched on, praising the attendees' generosity in inflated terms. Over time, the party grew more relaxed. People began mingling again, strolling from table to table, wine glasses in hand. The tall woman from earlier, buoyed by applause, moved through the crowd like a queen collecting compliments. She found her circle of conspirators, who immediately started exchanging jokes about the nobody they had confronted at the start of the evening. A slender man in an embroidered jacket laughed about how the woman's watch looked as if it had been salvaged from a thrift bin. Another teased that she probably traveled by bus if she could afford the fare at all. Suddenly, the tall woman spotted the same nobody stepping away from her quiet table, heading toward a side door as if looking for a private space. The tall woman's eyes gleamed, eager to add one more humiliating confrontation to the night's amusements. She beckoned two of her nearest friends to follow. They pursued the silent figure into a corridor that led to a smaller lounge set aside for staff or behind-the-scenes management. A hush fell, with none of the main crowd paying attention. The corridor's dim lighting revealed only the outlines of expensive shoes tapping on polished floors. The silent figure stopped near a row of unremarkable chairs, perhaps to take a moment of solitude. Then the tall woman and her companion stepped forward, blocking the path back to the main hall. "Why are you still lurking here?" The tall woman demanded, a note of superiority lacing her words. "Is it not enough that you took up a seat meant for someone else? Now you're prowling around restricted areas." The silent figure turned, expression unchanged. One of the tall woman's friends, wearing a half smile of malice, chimed in, "Maybe she's scouting for scraps to sneak into her bag." Perhaps a table centerpiece or some leftover dessert. The tall woman cackled softly. I've seen that happen before, you know. People come in, claim a seat, and slip out with stolen silverware. At least do yourself a favor and wait until the lights are off. She extended an arm as though to physically bar the silent woman's passage, eyes narrowing. The corridor's hush pressed in around them. The silent figure remained composed, blinking once. The tall woman stepped closer, her expensive perfume filling the space. You must think you're clever sneaking into an event for real donors, she hissed, voice turning dark. But none of us are fooled. We see your tattered purse, your discount blouse, your battered watch. Do you think we're naive enough to believe you're anyone important? Her friends snickered, adding murmurs of agreement. And that friend of yours, the man who claimed to vouch for you, he's barely a blip on this city's radar, one spat. We looked him up, mid-level accountant, no major shares in anything. Absolutely irrelevant. Another pointed at the watch. That's enough evidence right there. People with real class don't wander about with a filthy strap around their wrist. Still, the silent figure offered no retort. The tall woman's face twitched, annoyance flaring. She was used to seeing her victims tremble or break down. The unyielding calm in this young woman was unnerving. The tall woman snapped her fingers, drawing the attention of a staffer who had ventured into the corridor carrying linens. She commanded, this person is trespassing. Escort her out at once. I've had enough of her presence. The staffer hesitated, scanning the silent woman's face, then glancing at the tall woman's expensive gown. Social hierarchy was clear. The staffer stumbled into an apologetic stance. Miss, if you don't have a staff pass or a valid reason. The silent figure turned to the staffer, a quiet flicker in her eyes, and reached into her bag. She withdrew the same invitation that had been shown earlier. Check again, she said softly, the first word she'd spoken in the entire fiasco. Her voice held a cool poise that startled them. The staffer read the invitation, recognized the official seal, more than that recognized an inner endorsement rarely given. Confusion washed over the staffer's features, shifting into a mixture of awe and panic. The tall woman noticed the staffer's change in demeanor, bristled. What's wrong? She snapped. The staffer gulped, lips pressing together as though deciding whether to speak. Then a forced calm overcame them. I apologize, the staffer said, returning the invitation with trembling hands. I must have made a mistake. The tall woman's eyes narrowed further. Mistake. She's obviously an imposter or at best an accidental attendee. The invitation is worthless. Her friend chimed in, yes, worthless. We've seen plenty of forgeries. The staffer's voice shook. This is not a forgery. It's a top-tier pass personally authorized by, but the staffer caught themselves as though saying too much might reveal a secret. The tall woman scoffed, unconvinced. She opened her mouth to deliver another barb, but at that moment a faint ring echoed from a phone in her friend's purse, pulling them aside to answer. The staffer offered the silent figure a slight bow, turning to leave quickly. The corridor fell silent again, except for the tall woman's furious breathing. She glared at the young woman, tossing her hair back, stammering to find a new angle of attack. Even if that's a real pass, it doesn't change anything, she spat. You're nobody. You stand out here with no sense of respect for how this place is run. Do you think a single piece of paper can buy you acceptance among real power? The silent figure's shoulders rose in a slow breath, then settled. A distant memory flickered across her mind, a large study with floor-to-ceiling windows, an older man wearing reading glasses quietly handing her a set of documents. He insisted that when the time came, she would represent the family's holdings with a calm that no one could break. She'd sealed those documents away, rarely using them content to live on her own terms without leveraging the family name. That recollection glided away as quickly as it appeared. She made no motion to defend herself, now simply gazed at the tall woman with mild detachment. The friend with the phone call ended. It hissed something about, we can't let her get away with this. The tall woman sneered, we'll see how you handle being blacklisted from every event in this city. You can show that fancy pass around all you like, but once the influential families learn you're a nuisance, you'll never set foot in these circles again. The silent figure stood unblinking as though memorizing every vicious word. Without warning, footsteps approached from behind. The corridor parted to reveal a new presence, a man in a refined suit radiating an understated authority. People who recognized him might step back in deference. He paused upon seeing the confrontation eyes landing on the tall woman, then on the quiet newcomer. The tall woman's stance faltered as she recognized him. He was known for bridging many of the city's power circles, a liaison of sorts with direct ties to a major financial empire. She forced a smile, stepping forward in a show of false confidence. "Good evening, sir," she purred. "We were just sorting out a small misunderstanding. This guest is not where she should be, you see." He inclined his head politely, then turned to the silent figure. There was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. He said nothing for a beat, as though weighing the correct approach, then addressed the tall woman softly. "I believe you're mistaken." His voice was mild, but the effect on the corridor was immediate. A hush of respect fell, as if a new hierarchy had asserted itself. The tall woman froze, confusion flickering across her perfectly made-up face. "I'm not sure I understand," she said. He offered her a courteous but distant smile. "It's quite simple. You are speaking to someone who has every right to be here. More right than most, in fact." He shifted his gaze to the silent figure, inclining his head. "I'm sorry if there's been a disturbance. The board has been anticipating your presence, but you seem to keep a low profile. Are you all right?" She gave a faint nod, expression unchanging. The tall woman's eyes darted from one face to the other, struggling to process. The friend beside her tried to intervene. "Sir," she must have forged, but the man silenced him with a single raised hand. "Let's not embarrass ourselves further," he said quietly, a trace of steel in his tone. The tall woman's composure cracked. She attempted to salvage the situation, forcing a high-pitched laugh. "Perhaps we were overzealous in enforcing event etiquette," she stammered. "If she's truly meant to be here, I'm sure no one holds any grudges. We were just concerned, with security." The man turned a level gaze upon her, the corners of his mouth forming something that wasn't quite a smile. "Security is not your department," he replied. "I suggest you return to the main hall and enjoy the event." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, then added in a measured tone, "But do be mindful that your remarks and actions have been noted. The host committee frowns upon harassment, especially of an invited guest." A flick of something in his eyes implied that the consequences could be severe. The tall woman's face drained of color. She swallowed, nodded stiffly, and with a forced polite bow marched back down the corridor. Her companions followed, stealing nervous glances over their shoulders. The moment they disappeared into the main hall, the corridor's tension lessened. The man turned to the silent figure. "I heard you arrived quietly, insisted on not drawing attention," he said. "I respected that. I only intervened because the situation seemed out of hand." She gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Then with a courteous gesture, he escorted her back toward a more private route leading to the VIP lounge. He walked a pace behind her, a sign of respect, as though she outranked him. The staff member from earlier spotted them and bowed deeply, confirming a suspicion that the silent figure must hold a status beyond what the average attendee could fathom. Inside the VIP lounge, the hum of conversation slowed when she entered. A scattering of notable figures looked up, recognized her from half-remembered rumors or fleeting glimpses of a reclusive lineage. A hush of deference formed, though no one openly rushed forward. She made her way to an unoccupied chair in the corner, sitting with the same understated poise. The man in the refined suit stood near, ensuring no one else dared approach with hostility. Outside those walls, the tall woman and her circle found themselves conspicuously isolated. In fact, the man who was in charge of membership approvals had quietly approached them, asking questions about their behavior. They stuttered defenses, claiming they acted out of vigilance for the event's integrity. But subtle shifts in the room's social dynamic occurred. Acquaintances who once gravitated toward them began to drift away, suspecting a scandal. The mention of noted harassment loomed as a threat to their reputations, especially if word spread among the philanthropic network. Meanwhile, back in the lounge, the silent figure received a short, respectful greeting from the event's main coordinator, an older gentleman wearing a small pin signifying he was part of the city's philanthropic board. He approached with a cautious smile, addressing her by name. Her name carried weight, though few in the crowd had put face to rumor. The coordinator apologized for the ordeal, explaining that the special front table seat had been reserved for her, but some error must have occurred in communication. He offered to escort her there immediately, insisting it was an honor for the event to have her presence. She gave a polite shake of her head, indicating she was content to stay in the lounge. The coordinator bowed, though a flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. He retreated, perhaps uncertain why someone with her background would remain so inconspicuous. In a moment of stillness, she touched the scratched watch on her wrist, letting her fingertips graze the worn edges. A faint memory surfaced, a portrait in a sunlit corridor, her father's austere gaze, the hush of footsteps on polished floors, and a voice reminding her that wealth was not a throne from which to look down on others, but a vantage point from which to see if help was needed. That recollection vanished as the man in the refined suit approached again, speaking softly about the sponsor's speech set to happen soon. She rose, inclining her head in readiness. He guided her through a discreet side door that led to a small set of stairs behind the stage area. The main coordinator spotted them and rushed to greet her once more, apologizing in hushed tones for the earlier inconvenience, urging her to step on stage. She hesitated, scanning the large main hall from behind the curtains. Hundreds of faces waited there, many oblivious to the drama that had occurred. Some, however, might still hold their phones containing snapshots of her earlier humiliation. At last, she stepped onto the stage, standing near the podium where the coordinator introduced the main sponsor. A prominent philanthropic magnate gave a rousing speech about the cause, inviting a few notable donors to join him. As the final name was announced, many in the crowd exchanged puzzled glances. Her name was not widely recognized in the gossip circuit, but the sponsor's tone hinted at significance. She emerged, taking her place at the sponsor's side. Cameras flashed. The tall woman near the front table froze in horror, realizing this was the same person she'd mocked so viciously. A hush of incredulity rippled through the ranks of onlookers. The sponsor offered the microphone, praising her quiet but immense support of philanthropic initiatives. He spoke of her family's legacy, how they had quietly financed various charities for decades. He mentioned how her presence indicated a new era of open collaboration with the city's philanthropic board. Then he invited her to say a few words. A hush deeper than any that night enveloped the hall. Her eyes drifted across the rows of seats, noticing faces that had jeered, eyes that had looked upon her with scorn. She placed a hand lightly against the podium as though testing its stability, and let that moment of silence speak volumes. Some guests grew restless, anticipating some grand statement or condemnation. But when she finally addressed them, her words were succinct, tinged with an unwavering calm. She thanked the organizers for the invitation, acknowledged the importance of the charitable cause, and expressed her hope that everyone would unite to support it wholeheartedly. Her voice carried a gentle clarity, absent of any bitterness or triumph. Each phrase struck the crowd with a quiet dignity that challenged all the assumptions made about her. Afterward, applause rose, some of it genuine, some forced by social obligation. Cameras whirred, capturing her image for the next day's coverage. She stepped down from the stage, greeted by a line of well-wishers who suddenly recognized her significance. People clamored to hand her business cards, others congratulated her with breathless sincerity. She accepted each approach with a composed nod. Across the hall, the tall woman and her circle stood in stunned silence, hearts pounding as they realized the scale of their mistake. Their glances darted left and right, hoping to slip away before she noticed them. Yet she never looked directly their way. Some part of the tall woman felt relief, perhaps there was no immediate retribution. But there was also dread, the knowledge that they'd attacked someone who held immeasurable sway behind the scenes. Already a few of the tall woman's acquaintances peeled off, seeking safer alliances. The rest of the evening blurred in a swirl of formalities. She quietly met with the event's leadership, offered a brief donation slip that overshadowed even the largest contributions. The coordinator's eyes nearly bugged out at the sum, yet she insisted it remain private. More than once, the sponsor tried to coax her into accepting a seat at the front table, but she gently declined, preferring to remain near the back. Observers muttered about how that choice echoed a deeper character, not the usual show of wealth that so many flaunted. Meanwhile, the tall woman and her clique discovered themselves relegated to an afterthought. Whenever they tried to rejoin the main social stream, they found the conversation drifting away, or gentle, polite dismissals. A rumor spread that security had filed an incident report about harassment in the corridor. Whispers circulated that the tall woman's name might be blacklisted from future committees. The seeds of isolation sprouted around them with shocking speed. As the night wound down, only a core group of donors and organizers remained. She slipped out of the main hall, stepping once again into a quieter corridor. The man in the refined suit followed, ready to see her off. The tall woman who had been skulking in a corner glimpsed them passing and rushed forward, desperation etched on her once arrogant features. She tried to address the silent figure, stumbling over her words of apology. "I had no idea who you were," she confessed, voice trembling. "I never meant," but the silent figure simply offered a single slow gaze. No anger stained her eyes. She dipped her head in something akin to a farewell gesture. The tall woman floundered, tears threatening to mar her perfect makeup, realizing no words could erase her cruelty. The silent figure continued on, leaving the tall woman behind to face the weight of consequences. Moments later, outside the venue, a sleek car with tinted windows waited by the entrance. A discreet driver opened the rear door as she approached. The man in the refined suit lingered by her side, ensuring no lingering paparazzi caused trouble. She paused at the threshold, exhaled softly, then stepped into the car. Before the door closed, the man thanked her for not escalating the confrontation. She offered a slight nod as if to say that such pettiness was beneath the demands of her values. The door shut with a gentle click and the car pulled away from the gilded facade of the grand hall. Behind her, the bright lights of wealth and vanity receded. That night, returning to her private dwelling, a minimalistic apartment that held no trace of the enormous resources she possessed, she set aside her small purse on a modest kitchen table. She removed the scratched watch, placed it on a cloth, and ran a thumb over the glass face. Within the hush of that space, she recalled fleeting images, a father's guiding presence, an orchard in the distance, a single ring that had once been offered to her and quietly declined. Each memory flickered by with no explicit mention in her eyes or stance. Then, as if concluding a silent ritual, she slipped the watch back onto her wrist. Outside, the city lights pulsed, oblivious to how this night had upended the fates of those who crossed her path with disdain. In the following weeks, word spread among the social circles. The tall woman and her entourage found invitations drying up. The philanthropic committees collectively shunned them, citing an internal policy about preserving civility among guests. Their friends deserted them, sponsors retracted endorsements, and alliances crumbled. They tried to mount a defense claiming a misunderstanding, but no one risked offending the silent figure who had proven to be a powerful heir. Meanwhile, her presence at future events became a subject of heightened speculation. Some major donors hoped to meet her to align with her for lucrative opportunities. She attended a select few gatherings, each time arriving in plain attire, each time inviting the same confusion from the unsuspecting. But never again did anyone dare subject her to that level of humiliation. The memory of how swiftly punishment had come for her adversaries ensured a respectful distance. At times, she quietly used her position to champion policies that protected the marginalized. She funded scholarships for talented students from humble backgrounds, knowing well how it felt to be judged for appearance. She supported a major hospital wing, dedicating it to mental health services. All of it was done under philanthropic foundations with no flamboyant fanfare. Yet the city's rumor mill churned, describing her as both formidable and merciful, someone whose wealth could sway entire boards but who rarely claimed credit. Occasionally, she'd appear at a function standing in a corner, scanning the crowd with those calm eyes that had once stared down cruelty, only to slip out as soon as the formalities ended. One mild afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at her apartment building. The friend who had initially tried to help her at that humiliating event, the mid-level accountant who'd escorted her. He came bearing an apology for not defending her more strongly, for letting the crowd hound her, while he stood aside, anxious about his own standing. She welcomed him with quiet civility, offered a seat on her plain sofa, and listened. He explained how the aftermath of that night taught him the price of conformity at the expense of decency. She nodded, acknowledging his contrition without condemnation. Before leaving, he noticed her scratched watch on the table and made a hesitant remark about how it should be replaced with something that matched her status. She merely shook her head, an unspoken message that some things worn with memory were priceless beyond any brand or glitter. Time swept forward, weaving her deeper into the city's philanthropic tapestry. The orchard from her memory, nestled on a family estate she rarely visited, continued to bear fruit under the care of longtime staff. She quietly funded expansions, turning it into a sanctuary for children's camps, senior retreats, and community gatherings. Now and then she appeared there in unassuming clothes, kneeling in the grass, talking with the caretakers. They recognized her from childhood, remembering how she once roamed those fields with unshod feet, free from the weight of public perception. There was no mention of the glamorous galas or the humiliations endured, simply a shared mission to do good for those who needed it. A new orchard greenhouse was built, dedicated to a cause dear to her father's memory. Word of that greenhouse never made the city's tabloids. She had no interest in turning philanthropic efforts into social currency. Through all of this, rumors persisted that she was betrothed or secretly married to a man of immense power. Sometimes the press breathlessly speculated about a hidden spouse who might appear at any moment, overshadowing even her influence. She neither confirmed nor denied it. Then came a day when a foreign delegation arrived in the city, one with significant ties to international finance. At a grand conference, top industrialists and bankers convened, forging alliances that spanned continents. On the final evening, a formal banquet was hosted, rumored to feature one of the wealthiest families on earth. People soared with anticipation. She attended dressed once again in her understated style, capturing the same curious stares from the uninitiated. This time, however, the socialites who recognized her gave her a wide berth, remembering how swiftly the tides could turn for those who offended her. Partway through the banquet, an announcement silenced the hall. The city's leading figure owner of multiple conglomerates had arrived. He stepped in wearing a meticulously tailored suit posture, commanding. His presence alone stilled every conversation. Many recognized him as the rumored suitor from a powerful clan. He strode through that crowd, ignoring the usual swarm of well-wishers. His eyes locked on her across the enormous dining space, and in a gesture that spoke volumes, he approached with unhurried confidence. The hush deepened to a respectful silence. She stood meeting his gaze without a flicker of surprise. He offered his arm and she took it, the two of them turning toward the dais where the city's most influential folks had gathered. A ripple of awe coursed through the banquet. This man, known for shaping markets and toppling entire industries with a stroke of a pen, now addressed her with quiet familiarity. They did not announce an engagement or share any flamboyant displays. Instead, he murmured something discreetly, prompting her to nod. Then they moved toward a table near the dais where seats had been left vacant, presumably for them. Everyone else parted like waves, giving them space. The tall woman from that humiliating night was present, having clawed her way into this banquet by connections. She watched from the sidelines, terror and envy mingling in her eyes. She recalled how she once called that unassuming woman nobody and told her to rummage for scraps. Now the entire room seemed to revolve around this couple whose mutual presence commanded the highest respect. A hush followed them to their table, swirling with unspoken questions. He introduced her to a few high-level dignitaries who bowed or extended handshakes in a show of deep courtesy. In subdued tones, it was acknowledged that she was not only an heiress but possibly the backbone of certain philanthropic and financial movements in the city. From the corner of her vision, she glimpsed the tall woman lurking near a pillar, attempting to remain inconspicuous. The memory of those vicious remarks in the corridor flickered, but she offered no sign of recognition. Instead, she seated herself beside the man, responding politely to the dignitary's greetings, her manner as calm as ever. As the banquet progressed, an unspoken tension built. People anticipated a dramatic reveal, some big announcement about their union, or a stern condemnation of those who once wronged her. But none came. The man engaged in thoughtful conversation with foreign delegates, occasionally consulting her, trusting her insights. They shared small gestures that suggested a deep bond, the slightest lean of heads, a delicate exchange of glances. The tall woman and others who had once scorned or belittled her realized with crushing certainty that this pair could shape the city's entire future. Fear gnawed at them. Yet the silent figures seemed unconcerned with retribution or parading her triumph. At the banquet's conclusion, a final speech was called for. The man stood addressing the assembly with a poised gravity that befitted his status. He spoke of forging new alliances, bridging cultural divides, and focusing philanthropic investments on underserved communities. Then, with a subtle shift, he turned to her. He introduced her not by full name, but by praising her unwavering dedication to the city's well-being, her silent philanthropic actions, and the moral compass she brought to every decision. He ended with a concise statement, "I am most proud to call her my partner in every sense of the word." Applause thundered across the hall, some heartfelt, some riddled with nerves. She rose, offering a gentle incline of her head, not basking in the spotlight, but acknowledging the moment's significance. The next morning, the city buzzed with the news. Papers and online columns called it the official unveiling of a power couple who could reshape entire landscapes. Past humiliations that she endured became legend, retold as cautionary tales about judging by appearances. The tall woman and her cohorts, once dominant forces in social gatherings, found themselves ostracized. Friends turned away, reluctant to align with proven bullies who had insulted the city's new leading figure. Publicly, they tried to make amends, sending letters or calling the philanthropic boards with apologies. None of it undid the isolation now wrapping around them. They faced real losses. Business partners pulled out of deals, society clubs revoked memberships, and certain relatives cut ties to preserve their own reputations. The comedic cruelty they once wielded boomeranged into tangible consequences. She, on the other hand, continued much as before, quietly avoiding the limelight. The Orchard Project expanded, offering more services. She occasionally visited events with her partner, never flaunting, but never again undervalued. Some older people who saw her measured manner recognized a reflection of their own quiet resilience. They wrote letters, shared stories of how they had once been scorned or forced into lesser roles. She responded by directing more resources to community programs that helped older citizens or vulnerable populations. Word trickled back that her approach to power was not about crushing enemies or staging vengeance. Rather, it was about planting seeds of compassion in places left barren by arrogance. A year or more passed, and she rarely encountered the tall woman in public. But on a crisp autumn evening at a dedication ceremony for a new hospital wing, the two crossed paths unexpectedly. The tall woman was there as a minor donor, her posture subdued, her once glamorous circle reduced to a handful of anxious acquaintances. Spotting the silent figure, the tall woman froze, seeming to weigh whether to approach. Eventually, trembling with nerves, she stepped forward. "I owe you the deepest apology," she said, voice catching. "Everything we did was cruel. I never knew." She broke off, uncertain what else to say. The silent figure listened, then inclined her head once as if acknowledging the apology. There was no triumph in her eyes, just a steady stillness. The tall woman's posture sagged with relief or possibly regret that she'd lost everything through her own conceit. After a moment of awkward stillness, the silent figure moved on, blending into the crowd of hospital benefactors. The tall woman remained rooted, reflecting on how different life could have been if she had simply shown kindness instead of scorn. As the hospital dedication concluded, a small group of older volunteers approached the silent figure. They shyly offered thanks for her donations, explaining that the new wing would serve countless patients who once struggled to afford treatment. She accepted their gratitude with the same calm grace. Among them was a 90-year-old retiree who recalled seeing her father many decades ago. He praised the family's tradition of quiet generosity, hinting that she carried that torch brilliantly. She responded with a half-smile, setting a hand gently on the old man's shoulder before stepping away. No dramatic speech, no flourish of arrogance, just an act of empathy that reaffirmed the values she'd held since childhood. On a winter morning soon after, she found herself alone in the orchard's caretaker lodge, looking over documents that outlined the next phase of expansions. The caretaker, aged but still spry, served tea in chipped cups, reminiscing about how her father had once walked these grounds with determined footsteps. The caretaker described how the orchard thrived on patient cultivation, never rushing the trees but letting each season shape the harvest. The silent figure studied the caretaker's face for a few beats, then gently set aside the paperwork. She rose, stepping outside where the bare trees stood silent under the gray sky. She walked between some boots crunching on frosty grass, the orchard a metaphor for growth that demands neither applause nor permission. That night back in the city, she and her partner hosted a small dinner for close friends and key collaborators. No paparazzi, no grand announcements. At the table, a sense of easy camaraderie reigned. A few had known her story, how she faced humiliations with unshakable composure. One quietly thanked her for showing that real strength lives in dignity, not noise. Another shared that seeing her remain unflinching under insults taught them about staying true to oneself. She listened, her eyes reflecting a gentle kindness. Outside, the city's skyline glowed. Inside, the hush of friendship replaced the world's harsh judgments. Late that evening, when the guests had gone, she stood by a window with her partner, the city lights glittering below. He reached for her hand, and she let their fingers interlace. Though no words passed between them, the moment spoke of acceptance for who they both were, keepers of quiet power, guardians of a moral code that valued humility over spectacle. The memory of that cruel gala confrontation had faded into a single stepping stone on a longer path. Without seeking revenge or brandishing her wealth, she had simply stood her ground and in doing so unraveled the pretenses of those who mocked her. She didn't need to fight. She didn't have to prove anything. She stood in her own stillness. And in that stillness, the whole world found a gentler reflection. If these moments gave you a sense of calm resolve, hold them close. And if you find strength in her quiet example, share it. Let someone else see how dignity prevails beyond appearances. If you wish to stay, there's a place here for your voice. And if you go, let this story rest against your heart like a silent companion,